What's up guys, welcome to my tips and tricks for the Inferno, advice and pointers that may help you acquiring your Infernal cape. Firstly, let's go over the inventory and also the setups that I would recommend if you're attempting the Inferno. As of the making of this video, somebody has actually completed the Inferno with an armored crossbow without a twisted bow, which is amazing news to hear for the masses. So just bear that in mind when it comes to these setups. The first setup that you guys are currently looking at, in my opinion, is the tank setup. As you can see, I have myself the Ring of Suffering imbued, the Verax helm, and also the Verax plate skirt. Not to mention the Amulet of Fury being the primary amulet in slot, and you could also replace the Arcane with an Elysian just for an extra bit of insurance of reduced damage. I would advise this setup for somebody who is new to the Inferno and hasn't had any previous experience. This next setup is what I would refer to as the DPS setup. As you can see, I've swapped out the Ring of Suffering for the Archer's Ring imbued, the Fury Amulet with the Occult Necklace, and also the Necklace of Anguish, and we do not have a Verax helm or a Verax plate skirt for the extra defense. Now, I would not suggest this gear for somebody who is new to the Inferno, but it is a glass cannon build with very little defense and a lot of DPS output. This is primarily for those of you who have managed to get to the boss multiple times and feel confident doing so. So this third and final inventory and setup is my preferred setup. It is quite a simplistic setup. We do not take the Necklace of Anguish or the Occult Necklace, and we simply stick with the Amulet of Fury, the Verax helm being our two primary sources of defense. This build allows you to have the flexibility of taking an extra restore because you don't have to worry about taking an amulet switch, while at the same time holding on to a fair bit of DPS with the Archer Ring imbued, and also keeping some tankiness with the Verax helm. Now, with all three of these setups, the inventories are very similar, as you can tell. The two items that I would recommend most definitely having would be the Imbued Heart and also the Rune Pouch, which saves you 3 inventory slots. It's also recommended to take a Ranging Potion and a Stamina Potion for the final boss, and I would also recommend taking at least 8 or 9 brews, simply for insurance to fall back upon in case you get heavily damaged. I would also recommend taking at least 3,000 deaths, bloods, and at least 1,000 soul runes to make sure that you have enough to be able to blood barrage your health back throughout the Inferno, and also take the best darts you possibly can for your blowpipe, which I will hit more upon when we manage to get to the boss. So my first big tip for the Inferno is simply potting before you enter. Now, this is something that a lot of people don't do, and if you're unfamiliar with the Inferno, you will not know that the bats on the first few waves actually reduce your range plus and your run. I would advise this regardless of how experienced you are within the Inferno, just to give yourself a little boost in the very early waves. A big misconception with the Inferno is that you can only beat it if you are a prey flicking, ticking god. This is simply not true. As you can see in this clip here, I am by no means doing any kind of tick manipulation with prey flicks, and I am simply turning my prey on and off. This is something that can be used throughout the Inferno regardless of the wave that you're on, and regardless of what monster you are killing. Now, I've decided not to cover the lower waves and more or less focus on the harder waves, which I would consider when the mage minion spawns, and definitely the part of the Inferno which people seem to struggle on the most. My next tip would always be try and kill the most dangerous threat which is currently on your wave. Now, in this case, it would be the mage minion. However, due to its spawning location, I was able to take advantage of that and finish off the weaker minions on the wave first without having to take any unnecessary damage while tanking the mage. Now, as you can see in this clip, due to where the mage is currently spawned, it is no longer a threat if he decides to respawn minions, because they will simply be hugged behind the pillar. My next bit of advice would be to always try and focus the nibbler, which is in the middle of the spawn. The reason for this is because you have a greater chance of killing all three of them without having to worry about any stragglers. Don't worry yourself too much if you can't one-hit the minions, but that is where the arcane and also the more magic accuracy and damage definitely comes in handy. As you can see in this instance, when the nibblers spawned, they spawned in such a way it was actually impossible to hit all three with the first barrage. So what I simply do is I then kill off the final nibbler with the twisted bow for the extended range, and then move on to the minions which are in front of me. Now as you can see, I actually kill the bat before I kill the melee minion, and the reason for this is because, as I said previously, the bat actually reduces your stats and also your run energy, and is considered, in my opinion, probably the biggest pest in this scenario. Therefore, I decided to kill him first. My next piece of advice is simply this. If you are in a spawn in a scenario where you can kill the major without having to take any damage or aggro from anything else on the map, I would always advise to do so, because if you don't do this, what will happen is the major will simply respawn the minions that you have killed, and it will lead to having a longer run with potentially more supplies being used. Another big part of why people can't seem to get to the final boss in the Inferno is because they simply don't know when to use their supplies and when to reserve them. Now this here is a mistake that I made. As you can see, I accidentally stood one square too far into the mage's range while I was praying range. And for those of you that don't know, the max hit for that is a 70. Now I could have dealt with this scenario in two different ways. I could have either drank a Saradomin brew, because at the HP that I was at, I could have easily been one hit by the melee minion, or I could have done what I did, and knowing that the ticks of the attacks for the ranger and melee were slightly different, meant that I was able to preserve my food and didn't have to waste any brews. Here is an example of a very horrible spawn, and on top of that I make a fair few mistakes in this play. So firstly, as you see there, I shouldn't have ran out and tried to kill the final nibbler, which actually didn't die from the second hit and could have resulted in my immediate death because I had all four monsters attacking me. Now, I think probably one of the biggest tips and advice that I could give you guys is knowing when to brew. Now, as you see in this clip, I made a very big mistake there. I turned on prey range too early, and instead of risking the health on wave 62 or 3, I decided that I would simply drink the brews, because I would rather have less brews for the final boss than I would not make it there at all. This is a balance that a lot of people seem to struggle with, and a lot of people don't really know the exact time when they should eat. And what I will say to you, if you get above wave 50 and you're in a scenario where you could die simply through the circumstances of the spawn, I advise you to eat, because I believe it is much better to actually manage to get to the boss than not get there at all. Regardless of the supplies you have, getting to the boss gives you extra experience, and you will know how to handle yourself a lot better in the long term. Now, if you hadn't noticed during this clip, I hadn't actually killed the final nibbler. I would highly advise you to take a look at the wave and the situation that you currently are in. Under my circumstances at this point, the column was near enough at full health, and I was on wave 63, meaning that in 2 or 3 waves time, the columns are going to come down regardless. Killing that nibbler and using the supplies I would have by doing so was really not worth me taking the risk. Wave 64, where you have to face 2 rangers and a major, is debatably one of the hardest waves running up to the final boss. Now, luckily for myself, I actually managed to get a very nice spawn for this, but you may not be as lucky. My best bit of advice for you, if you do manage to get stuck in a bad situation, is to take your time, take advantage of your surroundings, and by that I mean the pillars, and also the fact that you can freeze the monsters and manipulate them to move. I don't really think there's that much advice I can give on the double mage spawn, other than try and kill them at the same time so you don't risk them spawning themselves again, and also make sure that you are clear of the columns when they collapse, because if you are not, you will take 50 damage. Same goes for the single Jad wave. Not too much that I can give in terms of advice. If you don't know how to kill Jad, the Inferno probably isn't for you, honestly. The next two tips that I am going to give you guys helped me so much, and I wish it was something that I picked up upon the first 3 times I got to triple Jads. After finally completing triple Jads, I then died 2 times afterwards, which really confused me because I thought, I've already done this once, I don't feel very nervous, why did I just die? Looking back at the clips, I noticed that the time that I actually completed the triple Jads and had no problems at all was when I had my camera angle facing east. I personally found that having your camera angle focusing east meant that you had the best vision of all 3 Jads, because I think a lot of the time people panic because they can't see the full animation the Jads are actually performing. Therefore, having your camera angle facing east when you get to triple Jads, in my opinion, is a very key tip to helping you kill all 3 of them. On top of that, I would highly suggest going into full screen mode, or at least making your client resizable so that you can have a broader view of all 3 of the animations. Moving on to the final boss. Now, if you are planning on killing the Inferno and you do plan to go for the Infernal Cape, I would highly suggest paying attention to what I have to say, because if you run into this head first with no game plan and no knowledge of what happens during this fight, you are doomed to most likely fail. A very nice tip that I can give you guys is to position a vial on either side of the map. As you can see in the 2 clips I've just shown you, that is the exact position you want to drop the vial. This way, when you are stood next to the vial, you will know that you are in a safe spot, and with the twisted bow, you can attack the Jad when it does spawn from that exact position without actually having to worry about being hit by the boss himself. My next piece of advice is where you should position yourself around the shield to make sure that you don't get hit by the boss. Now, in my opinion, the best way to do this is to be basically in line with the front of the shield in whichever direction it's running, while trying not to overstep the mark. This is something that will become easier the more attempts you make at the boss. Once you've damaged the boss 200 health and it is at roughly 1000 hit points, it will spawn a ranger and a major. Now, my best advice for dealing with the major and ranger is to try and kill the ranger as fast as you possibly can. The best way to do this, in my opinion, is to try and blowpipe it down. This is the fastest way of dealing with the ranger, as it doesn't have the most mage damage. Therefore, the twisted bow isn't as effective as it is on the major. Once you manage to get the boss down to roughly under half health, it will spawn a Jad. To be completely honest with you, it's nothing to worry about. If you've been able to kill the triple Jad, then killing a single Jad while having to move left and right isn't that much of a challenge. I would say the biggest advice I can give you is to blood barrage the central healer to make sure that you aggro all 3 of them at once. Apart from that, stay cool, try to relax, and try not to worry too much about the death which is on opposite sides of the shield. At roughly 220 health, the boss will spawn healers. I would highly recommend not attacking the boss once it is below 30% health, just in case you do trigger the healers to spawn. The reason for this is because soon the ranger and major minion will spawn, and if they spawn at the same time as the healers, not only do you have to tank the damage from the mage and range, but also the constant damage that you get hit from the healers. Here is a perfect example of that. Now, firstly, I had the healer spawn while I was midway through the run, meaning that I could only hit off 2 of the healers out of 4. The problem with this is the fact that the other 2 healers, while I'm dealing with these guys, are actually healing the boss, and as you can see, they heal the boss very fast. The second problem with this clip is the fact that the Ranger and the Major spawned, because I didn't wait enough time for them to spawn so I could kill them and then deal with the healers on their own. Now, as you can see, this is a minefield. This is a place which is definitely somewhere you want to avoid being, as it is most likely going to lead to inevitable death. This, on the other hand, is a perfect example of what to do. As you can see, the boss is currently sat at 344 health, which is just over 100 health from when the healers were spawned, but instead of risking the healers spawn before the Major range have, I simply walk side to side with the shield repeatedly until the Major and Ranger spawn. As you can see, I first start off by aggroing the Major, which in this scenario is the best thing I could have done, while quickly trying and taking out the Ranger with my blowpipe to try and take as little damage as possible. Once both the Ranger and Major are both dead, I then proceed to attack the boss and make it spawn the healers. Now, something very important which I do in this clip is I only want to spawn the healers when I'm in either the west or the east corner. Now, the reason for that, as you can see in this clip right now, is that I can run down the line and attack the healers as I go, leading to them healing the boss as little as possible. If the healers were to spawn while I was in the center of the boss room, what would happen is there would be 2 healers I couldn't touch, which would be healing the boss, which would lead to me potentially dying. It is also advisable to use the redemption prayer, which is the blue heart above your head, while dealing with the healers, just in case they manage to hit you down below 10 health, which will restore your health back up to 30 while draining your prayer down to 0. This is simply a safety tactic just to ensure that you aren't going to die from the healers. Once the healers are dead, you continue attacking the boss until it is inevitably dead. While you are attacking the boss, there is a chance, if you don't kill it fast enough, which will most likely happen, is that the range and the Major will spawn for a 3rd time. Now, as you can see in the clip that I show you right now, my biggest concern is the Ranger. Because the boss itself is on such low health and I'm fairly low on supplies, what I actually did was I simply aggroed the Major, killed the Ranger, and then continued to kill the boss while the Major was still alive. However, I would not advise doing this if you don't think you have enough DPS potential to kill the boss before a Jad spawns for a 2nd time. Needless to say, having a Jad and a Major attacking you at the same time is pretty much GG. That is all the advice that I have for you guys. Hopefully some of this information is useful to some of you. If you have any further questions that you wish to ask, leave them down in the comments and I will do my best to reply to you. Like I've said in the description, this video is not a guide to do the Inferno. It is simply my best tips and advice, and I'm hoping that it will help a few of you out. With that being said, guys, good luck with the Inferno. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Make sure you give it a thumbs up if it was helpful at all. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you very soon.